What if the greatest war stories were handpicked by the man who redefined cinematic history? Steven Spielberg, the mind behind Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List, has long admired the power of World War II films. Today, we dive into 15 World War II movies Spielberg considers essential viewing, the very films that inspired, influenced, and emotionally shaped one of Hollywood's greatest directors. Let's begin the countdown. The Longest Day, 1962. Before Saving Private Ryan, there was The Longest Day, a panoramic, black-and-white war epic that captured the enormity of D-Day like never before. Spielberg has cited this film as a major influence, especially for its staging of the Normandy landings. With its massive international cast including John Wayne, Henry Fonda, and Richard Burton, the movie weaves together perspectives from American, British, French, and German forces, giving the viewer a 360-degree view of June 6, 1944. What makes The Longest Day unforgettable isn't just its scale, but its commitment to authenticity. Based on Cornelius Ryan's best-selling book, the film included technical advisors who were actual participants in the invasion. Spielberg once said that this movie was the first time I saw war treated with such a documentary feel. That aesthetic stuck with him and helped define the gritty realism of Saving Private Ryan. More than a movie, The Longest Day was a blueprint, one that Spielberg would take to more emotional and visceral heights decades later. The Best Years of Our Lives, 1946. This isn't a movie about battlefields. It's about what happens after. William Wyler's The Best Years of Our Lives chronicles the emotional return of 3 American veterans who struggled to adjust to civilian life. It moved Spielberg deeply, so much so that he often references it when discussing the aftermath of war and its psychological scars. The film follows an airman haunted by bombing raids, a sailor who lost both hands, and an infantry sergeant struggling to reconnect with his family. Spielberg praised the film's courage in showing the war that doesn't end when the guns go quiet. It's a raw look at PTSD, survivors' guilt, and broken relationships. Themes Spielberg echoed in The Pacific and the final moments of Private Ryan. One of the film's stars, Harold Russell, was a real double amputee, a casting choice Spielberg found powerful and ahead of its time. It was, in Spielberg's words, a war movie without the war. And maybe that's the most honest kind. In many ways, this film taught Spielberg that the most enduring war stories live not in the trenches, but in the hearts of those who come back changed forever. 12 O'Clock High, 1949. For Spielberg, 12 O'Clock High wasn't just about dogfights and bombers. It was about leadership, responsibility, and the mental toll of command. Gregory Peck stars as a hard-nosed general brought in to whip a demoralized bomber unit into shape. But the real battle is internal, a man torn between the mission and the souls he's sending into hell. Spielberg has often referenced this film as a study in the psychology of war. Unlike many war films that glamorize bravery, 12 O'Clock High strips it bare. The tension lies in the briefing rooms, the empty bunks, and the faces of young men waiting to fly into enemy fire. Spielberg was particularly drawn to the film's realism and emotional restraint, hallmarks he carried into Band of Brothers. Interestingly, real World War II veterans often cite 12 O'Clock High as the most accurate portrayal of their experience. Spielberg took that to heart, using it as a tonal reference when crafting the military hierarchy and moral burdens in his own war films. This was one of the first movies to treat war as a pressure cooker for the soul. It didn't need explosions to rattle you. It had truth. And that, Spielberg believed, was the most powerful weapon in a director's arsenal. Battleground, 1949. When Spielberg wanted to depict the mud-soaked misery of soldiers in Saving Private Ryan, he looked to Battleground, a film that dared to portray American GIs not as invincible heroes, but as cold, hungry, frightened men just trying to survive. Set during the Battle of the Bulge, It follows a squad from the 101st Airborne trapped in Bastogne during a brutal winter siege. What drew Spielberg to this film was its sheer realism. There's no soaring score, no glamorous heroism, just fog, frostbite, and fear. The characters bicker, freeze, and falter, a tone Spielberg replicated when showing the emotional breakdowns of his own characters under fire. Battleground also made use of former soldiers as technical advisors, grounding every moment in authenticity. Spielberg admired the film's small, intimate focus, a style he would emulate when directing tense, character-driven sequences in Band of Brothers. In interviews, he once called Battleground a quiet masterpiece that makes you feel the cold through the screen. It's not a story of strategy or politics, but of survival, and that's what makes it timeless. The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957. David Lean's The Bridge on the River Kwai is more than a war film. It's a psychological thriller set against the backdrop of Japanese POW camps. Spielberg has often cited it as a profound influence, admiring how the story explores obsession, pride, and the moral paradoxes of war. Alec Guinness plays Colonel Nicholson, a British officer who insists on building a bridge for the enemy, out of sheer principle. Spielberg marveled at how the film blurs the line between duty and delusion. He once remarked, "It's not about war. It's about what war does to men." That core idea, how good intentions twist under pressure, appears again and again in his own work, especially in Schindler's List, where choices are morally tangled and consequences echo. From its haunting whistling tune to its explosive climax, The Bridge on the River Kwai remains a masterclass in character storytelling. Spielberg credited Lean with teaching him how to build emotional tension without action, a lesson he applied in scenes like the candlelit confession in Private Ryan. It's a film where the greatest battle is inside the human mind, and Spielberg called it one of the most intellectually daring war movies ever made. The Great Escape, 1963. For a young Spielberg, The Great Escape was pure cinematic adventure. And yet, beneath the motorcycle chases and whistling soundtrack, it lit a spark. He watched it as a child and later admitted it was one of the films that made him fall in love with war stories. Based on a true story, the film dramatizes the escape of Allied POWs from a German camp, blending charm with grit. Starring Steve McQueen, James Garner, and Richard Attenborough, it's a rare war movie that lets its characters breathe. Spielberg later said that what fascinated him wasn't just the escape. It was the camaraderie, the planning, the constant psychological chess game between captives and captors. He admired how The Great Escape balanced entertainment with stakes. You laughed with the men, then held your breath when the bullets flew. It's a tonal tightrope Spielberg walked himself in Empire of the Sun, where childhood wonder coexists with wartime horror. Though less gritty than some others on this list, The Great Escape held a special place in Spielberg's heart. It was war reimagined as resilience, and in that spirit, it became a classic blueprint for storytelling adventure in times of darkness. Das Boot, 181. When Spielberg saw Das Boot, he was floored. Wolfgang Petersen's German U-boat thriller did something few war films dared. It put the enemy in the driver's seat and made you root for them. Set almost entirely within the claustrophobic hull of a submarine, the film tracks a German crew as they battle depth charges, dwindling oxygen, and mounting dread. Spielberg was captivated by the film's intensity. He once said it made him feel trapped, praising its ability to generate suspense without showing a battlefield. The tight quarters, sweat-drenched faces, and deafening silence between explosions made Das Boot one of the most immersive war films ever made. Spielberg admired how it humanized the other side, turning faceless enemies into desperate men trying to survive. This perspective influenced Schindler's List, where Spielberg gave complexity even to German officers refusing to paint war in absolutes. He also echoed Das Boot's tension-building style in scenes like the Tiger tank standoff in Saving Private Ryan. For Spielberg, Das Boot was essential because it stripped war of ideology and made it about the terrifying reality of being hunted beneath the sea. A pure, emotional experience. Schindler's List, 1993. It may seem unusual to include his own film, but Spielberg himself insists Schindler's List is essential viewing, not as a director's pride, but as a moral obligation. The story of Oskar Schindler, a German industrialist who saved over 1,000 Jews from the Holocaust, marked Spielberg's most personal and emotionally devastating work. He often said this wasn't a movie he wanted to make. It was one he had to. He shot it in stark black and white, foregoing stylized drama for raw truth. He used real locations, survivors as consultants, and even declined a salary, donating it to Holocaust education. For Spielberg, the film wasn't just storytelling, it was witness. Its cultural impact was profound. Schools adopted it, politicians praised it, and it earned 7 Academy Awards. Spielberg founded the USC Shoah Foundation to preserve testimonies from genocide survivors, directly inspired by the film's legacy. In interviews, he's described Schindler's List as the most important work of his life. It showed that cinema could preserve history, fight denial, and evoke empathy in millions. To Spielberg, it's not just a film, it's a testimony. And that, more than anything, defines essential. Saving Private Ryan, 1998. Another of Spielberg's own, Saving Private Ryan, redefined the war genre. He approached it not as spectacle, but as sacred memory. Inspired by his father's World War II service and the real story of the Neeland brothers, Spielberg sought brutal honesty, no romanticism, no censorship. The film opens with the now iconic D-Day sequence, 27 minutes of terror, confusion, and chaos that Spielberg crafted after months of research and consultation with veterans. Bullets snap past the camera, bodies fall, and the sand turns red. It's cinematic horror, grounded in history. Critics called it revolutionary. Veterans wept. Younger generations saw war for the first time, not as glory, but as trauma. Spielberg used handheld cameras, desaturated color, and sound design that mimicked real auditory trauma. The realism wasn't for shock. It was reverence. Every character in the film represents a moral question. Duty versus survival, leadership versus compassion. Spielberg didn't want heroes, he wanted humans. The film won 5 Oscars and inspired the HBO series Band of Brothers and the Pacific. Spielberg himself has said it was his attempt to honor the people who gave us our world. And that's what makes Saving Private Ryan not just essential, but eternal. Patton, 1970. Steven Spielberg has always praised Patton not just for its grand scale, but for its character complexity. George C. Scott's explosive performance as General George S. Patton delivered one of the most iconic portrayals of a military figure ever captured on screen. But what fascinated Spielberg was the contradiction, a brilliant strategist who could win battles, yet lose people with his arrogance. The opening monologue, Patton, standing before an American flag, left an indelible mark on Spielberg. He admired how the film blended grandeur with intimacy, portraying war as both political theater and personal obsession. Spielberg noted that Patton wasn't a standard war hero. He was difficult, bombastic, and even tragic. That moral tension informed Spielberg's own portrayals of leadership in The Pacific and Band of Brothers. He wanted viewers to question those who lead, to see both their valor and their flaws. Patton didn't glorify war. It revealed the emotional cost of commanding it. For Spielberg, Patton was proof that a war film could be Shakespearean, a character study in a combat uniform. Stalag 17, 1953. Billy Wilder's Stalag 17 occupies a unique space in Spielberg's list, a war movie that dares to laugh. Set in a German POW camp, it follows a group of captured American soldiers who suspect one of their own is an informant. William Holden's Oscar-winning performance as the cynical Sergeant Sefton gave the film a jaded, sardonic energy. Spielberg appreciated how Stalag 17 used humor and suspense to navigate darkness. It was one of the first films he saw that mixed genre, war, comedy, and mystery, without sacrificing realism. The sense of paranoia and betrayal resonated with him deeply. In interviews, Spielberg credited Wilder's work as deeply influential in teaching him tonal balance. The levity in Stalag 17 isn't just comic relief, it's emotional armor. Spielberg mirrored this approach in Empire of the Sun, where young Jim finds pockets of wonder amid war's chaos. More than a prisoner story, Stalag 17 showed Spielberg how laughter could survive even in the bleakest places, and how storytelling could, too. A Matter of Life and Death, 1946. This mystical war film by Powell and Pressburger left Spielberg stunned. A Matter of Life and Death blends fantasy and reality, telling the story of a British pilot who survives a doomed mission and must argue for his life in a celestial courtroom. Spielberg described it as one of the most imaginative films ever made about war's emotional aftermath. He was deeply inspired by its visual ambition, Technicolor Earth, monochrome heaven, and its existential questions about fate, love, and sacrifice. Spielberg once said that while Saving Private Ryan showed war's horror, A Matter of Life and Death showed its meaning. That storytelling duality influenced his approach in Schindler's List and Munich, where history collides with humanism. The film also dared to be poetic. It didn't need realism to hit hard. It used metaphor and magic. For Spielberg, it was a reminder that even the most brutal wars are fought inside the human heart. Fires on the Plain, 1959. This brutal Japanese masterpiece by Kon Ichikawa is one of the darkest films on Spielberg's list. Set in the Philippines during the final days of World War II, it follows a starving Japanese soldier, wandering through a landscape of death and madness. There are no battles here, only suffering, cannibalism, and moral decay. Spielberg has spoken about Fires on the Plain with reverence, calling it a film that refuses to flinch. It doesn't glorify sacrifice or disguise agony. It forces you to witness war at its most degrading. This raw truth, Spielberg said, is why the film matters. While Spielberg's work often includes hope, he acknowledged that Fires on the Plain taught him the value of restraint, that not every story needs redemption, sometimes survival is the only goal. He carried this weight into the Pacific, where Japanese soldiers were not villains, but equally broken victims of their empire. In many ways, Fires on the Plain is the anti-war movie, and for Spielberg, that made it essential. The Thin Red Line, 1998. Released the same year as Saving Private Ryan, Terrence Malick's The Thin Red Line couldn't have been more different. While Spielberg showed the physical horror of war, Malick explored its spiritual toll. Set in Guadalcanal, the film drifts through the inner monologues of soldiers questioning life, nature, and violence itself. Spielberg was deeply impressed. He called it hypnotic, reflective, and needed. Where he used blood and sand, Malick used sunlight and silence. Spielberg recognized in it the balance he often wrestled with, how to tell the truth about war without losing the poetry of the human soul. The two films were seen as rivals, but Spielberg never saw it that way. In fact, he celebrated The Thin Red Line as a companion piece. Both films, he believed, helped modern audiences reconnect with the cost of war, emotionally, psychologically, and metaphysically. For Spielberg, Malick's vision reminded him that war is not just strategy or survival. It's about what's lost, inside and out. The Pianist, 2002. Roman Polanski's The Pianist was a film Spielberg didn't just admire, he felt connected to it. The true story of Władysław Szpilman, a Polish-Jewish pianist who survived the Holocaust in hiding, mirrored the themes of Schindler's List in its simplicity, sorrow, and subtlety. Spielberg praised it as a haunting masterpiece that never asks for your tears, but earns them. What Spielberg respected most was the film's restraint. Adrian Brody's performance, nearly silent for much of the runtime, echoes with loneliness and dignity. The horrors are seen, but rarely dramatized. The survival is miraculous, but never romanticized. Spielberg often said that The Pianist carried the same emotional honesty he strived for, showing humanity not in grand gestures, but in quiet resilience. Polanski, a Holocaust survivor himself, gave the story an authenticity Spielberg found sacred. For Spielberg, The Pianist was more than essential viewing, it was sacred history, rendered with grace. From explosive epics to poetic elegies, these 15 films helped shape Steven Spielberg's vision of World War II. They're more than recommendations, they're a cinematic inheritance. Watch them not just to see the war, but to feel its cost. Because, as Spielberg believes, history lives through the stories we tell.